I want to get the 426 where it's a little more turnkey.
Can we start it?
Yeah, let's try.
All right, guys, a little peek behind the scenes at RestoMods. You guys know we give away a car every 3 months. It doesn't sound like a lot until you're trying to get 4 cars a year ready to give away that are at the level that you guys are accustomed to. The dogs are gonna have a little playtime while we're here as well. So anyways, we just bought this 1970 Dodge Charger RTSE. It's a Hemi car. It came to us out of Pennsylvania. We found this car on autotrader.com. I wish I could show you the actual listing, but we forgot to save it. And now it's been bought, and so the listing's been taken down. So we're gonna try to remember as much stuff as we can for the listing. I will tell you right away, the seller was asking $100,000 for this car, which isn't crazy for a 1970 Charger. If you're trying to go buy a Hemi 1970 Charger, $100,000 is not out of the question. We eventually negotiated the seller down after looking at some more detailed photos, different things. We eventually paid $90,000 for the car as it sits right now. And then we paid another $2,000 in shipping to get it from Pennsylvania to us here in San Diego. Couple things about the car that we do know. The seller that sold it to us has had the car for 35 years. So I think that puts his acquisition around 1989. Is that math right? 89, 35 years, yeah, 24, okay. So, guy had the car for about 35 years, and there was a restoration, I think, in 2003. So I think this car was painted in 2003. And then I think about 4 or 5 years ago, he put this Hemi engine in it, and there's about 3,000 miles on this Hemi. I'll let Esparza get into those details, but it's a Hemi. It's not a modern Hemi. He did say it was bored over. I don't want to misquote, but I think it was maybe like 60 over.
Yeah, he said it was bigger.
Something like that. So it has been bored. Esparza figured out how to open the hood.
I finally figured it out.
So that's great. All right, why don't you walk us through what we got here for our $90,000?
Okay, so that does seem like a lot of money, right? But Chargers are hard to find. It's triple black. It's in really good condition. It wasn't the best ad. You know, the car was kind of vaguely described, but there was pictures of it like in a well-kept garage, and the paint looked really good in the pictures, which is hard, but the lighting was good in the pictures.
Yeah, like the pictures were bad, but the paint looked good.
Right. The paint looked good, and on a black car, the way he had it lighted, you could really see the reflection of the paint. And then the 426. So this is not an original 426 Hemi car. This was originally a 440. It was a big block car. We have the tag here that we still have yet to completely decode.
What is up, RestoMods Nation? It's Joe. Just going to interrupt the video here. As I was editing this video, I decided to go ahead and put together the decoded fender tag for Chris and Chris. And I am here bringing you guys all the good stuff about this 1970 Dodge Charger RT. Just starting from the bottom line first of the fender tag, it's usually the most important information. Code E86 means that this indeed was a 440 cubic inch V8 engine, 4-barrel carburetor, making 375 horsepower. Pretty good for its day. Code D32, it says that this 70 Charger came with the heavy-duty A727 TorqueFlite 3-speed automatic transmission. Code X329 says that this was indeed a Charger RT model with a 440 engine. Code U0G stands for U, which is 440 engine, a 0, which stands for 1970, and G, which stands for St. Louis Assembly Plant. So we know that this 1970 Dodge Charger was assembled in St. Louis, Missouri, like many B-body Mopars of the day. 171330 is just a sequence. Code TX9 says that this 70 Charger Did originally come in exterior paint color black, which is really cool. So originally a triple black car. Code CRXA corresponds to the interior trim. Charcoal and black leather bucket seats. Code TX9 corresponds to the upper door frame paint, which is black. Code C08 corresponds to the scheduled production date of the 70 Charger, and that date is December 8th, 1969. And then the code 28345 just corresponds to the order number. Code V1X corresponds to black vinyl roof. This was originally a black vinyl top car from the factory. A01 corresponds to the light package. So this 70 Charger did have glove box lights, map lights, fender mounted turn signals. Code A47, so this was a special edition package. It had some luxury features and trim enhancements. And then code B51 says that this 70 Charger did come with power brakes from the factory. Code C16 corresponds to center console. So this Charger, like many others of its day, had a center console. Code C55 corresponds to bucket seats. Again, this Charger did come with bucket seats from the factory. Code G31 and G33 corresponds to driver's side and passenger side chrome mirrors. Code M51 corresponds to body side moldings. Code J25 corresponds to 3-speed variable wipers. Code J45 corresponds to hood tie-down pins. So this Charger did come from the factory with hood tie-down pins. Code L31 corresponds to hood and fender mounted turn signals. So you will notice that there are turn signals in the fenders and in the hood. Not all Chargers came with the hood mounted turn signals, which is pretty neat. Code M21 corresponds to roof drip rail moldings. Code M31 corresponds to belt moldings. Code R22 corresponds to an AM with 8-track stereos. And then code V68 corresponds to a stripe delete. So a lot of Chargers, especially the RT Chargers, came from the factory with vinyl stripes. This Charger had a stripe delete. And then finally, code 26 corresponds to a 26-inch radiator. Well, that's pretty much it on the decoding of this 1970 Charger. I will kick it back to Chris and Chris.
It's already modified with a 426 Hemi. This is like the most legendary Mopar engine available. And we haven't never had one with a true Gen 2 426 Hemi.
So when you say Gen 2, is this like period correct, or is this?
Very period correct, yeah. So like if this car was the original Hemi, it would have had basically this configuration of engine, and it's probably the most desirable Charger out there if this was all original. So it's no secret why somebody built it up to look this way, because it does have this engine. We got the car, basically didn't know a ton about it, knew that the owner had had it for a long time, really loved the car, which is what we like to see. It's hard to buy a car from somebody who's just flipping it because they don't put the same amount of attention into a car. They don't take care of it the same way. They don't have the same love for a car when they're just trying to make a buck off of it. So that was a good green flag that we saw. And we kind of took a risk on it because there's just not that many clean Chargers out there. There's a lot of stuff I look for right away on Chargers. One of them is the engine compartment. A lot of times, like cars that haven't been restored, and especially East Coast cars, they rust. I mean, Mopars are notorious for rust. I just peeked in the trunk pan after receiving it, and it looks like it is an original trunk pan that has been restored, so it didn't have any complete holes rusted through. It had some very light pitting that was taken care of. So that's huge on a car like this. The suspension, steering, and brakes is mostly original Mopar stuff, so there's some room for improvement there. And I don't feel bad about modifying a car that already doesn't have the stock engine. It has a better engine. So like if we were to do bolt-on stuff that you could go back to original if you wanted, you'd have to take this engine out to go back to all original, which why would you do that? It's sacrilege to take a 426 out of anything. But there's some room for improvement here. I mean, we could do fuel injection on it. We want to do AC on the car. But this was reportedly, this Hemi was built by Indy, which is a reputable engine builder and parts supplier for Hemis. It didn't start so good when we first got it. It has a choke. It's a dual carburetor. It's a dual quad setup with Edelbrock carburetors. We got it on a cold night, late at night. Our shipper dropped the car off at like 7 o'clock and it was dark here. Never ideal to lay eyes on a car at night. But that's what happened. We got the car, had a hard time starting it. I think it was out of gas. We realized right off the bat the fuel gauge doesn't work. We played with the choke a little bit, set the idle a little bit, and got it to run good. And then we quickly realized that if you leave the battery hooked up, it drains. So we found like little things that are very common in an old car. And I think these are things that the guy had it for so long and drove it so little that they weren't a problem for him to live with. But obviously as we go through a car, we want it like ready to go. Like get in, jump in, anybody who is anybody can just turn the key. As close to a modern car as possible without losing all the charm of an old car. But with that being said, there's some room for upgrades. But what we wanted to start with was like a complete rust-free 70 Charger. It's triple black with a really nice paint job and a 426 Hemi and a 4-speed. So having all those things in place, if you started with a shell, which even a clean 70 Charger shell is anywhere from like 40 grams. Some people will say, oh, I can find them a lot cheaper. Cool, go find the rusty one for a lot cheaper.
All right, guys, stop what you're doing real quick and hit that subscribe button. When we get to 100,000 subscribers on the RestoMods channel, we are gonna give away this fully restored and modified 75 Ramcharger to one lucky subscriber, and it could be you, but you gotta be subscribed. Hit that subscribe button right now. Share the channel with your friends. Help us get to 100,000 sooner, and you might win it.
But starting with that parts list in a painted car, I mean, a nice black paint job on a car like this can cost you 30 grand these days. Who knows what these engines go for? Like one built by Indy, a 426, that's been completely gone through. You know, you could easily have 20 grand into this engine. Right there, you're at 50, not including anything else on the car. So although the price seems steep, it's hard to replicate something like this.
I mean, try to find one.
They're hard to find.
Plus it comes with this cool piston grip keychain.
Right. And that is indicative. So there was a lot of other cool stuff about this car. I really love, because it is a true RT, it has a lot of those little extra touches on it. Somebody put the Hemi badge on here, which is kind of cool because with the hood closed, how would you know? I love the look of the Magnum 500s on the car. We usually end up going with bigger wheels because we go with bigger disc brakes, but that is such an iconic look. We did notice the tires are dated. That's just something when we got the car. You know, the tires are super old. The interior is in really good condition, and a lot of it looks like it's mostly original. So like for it to have held up in original condition this well is really rare. We might do some freshening up. There's some room for improvement. And then we noticed a lot of things that are like typical Dodge things. So there was a little bit of like room for improvement on maybe just some of the interior. You know, take the steering wheel cover off. Let's see what that steering wheel looks like underneath. Does it need to be restored or replaced? The pistol grip shifter is really cool. There's like tiny little things, like the interior light lens looks like it's cooked a little. We could replace that. Like I said, the fuel gauge doesn't work, but it has the tick-tock tack, which is really cool. It's like a tack with a clock inside of it. And it's just this is like, aside from the paint job, it's a pretty honest car, and it's been together for a long time. So that's a big thing too. It's holding up pretty good. The more we looked at it, it's not perfect. And some people would say at that price point, I want something perfect. There's no such thing as perfect, especially in the Mopar world. So it has little things. Like we noticed the vinyl top, like right at the very edge, maybe is starting to peel up a little. I would venture to say that this vinyl top has probably been on here for 20 to 30 years.
At least since that 2003 restoration, right?
Right. So it underwent a restoration, and then it was taken care of. It was in a garage, you can tell, because living on the East Coast, if this car was driven a lot, especially during the winter months, it would not be in this condition. So it has the fuel cap, all the little trim piece. Oh yeah.
It doesn't pop open.
It's probably all original. It's probably lost its spring tension. I really like this like rear panel that some of these had. So there's a bunch of different options as far as taillights and trim on a 70. Someone knows exactly what came with what, but you had to get like special, like I think only the SE had the whole panel, and then this one's obviously an RT too, so it has that. So there was like a lot of little cool things and badges, and then being in a black on black car, This thing just had the look. It had exactly what we wanted. A really nice paint job too. So that's hard to get. So I don't know what, so the next question, a big reason we do these videos, we bought the car. We want to be upfront about what we bought. They're never perfect. You know, we noticed all the little flaws, and then you get carried away about like, well, how far do I want to go to make it perfect? And so sometimes it's repainting. It might be redoing the whole vinyl top, seeing what's under there. Sometimes these have rust under there. Sometimes you open a can of worms, but it would be like what we would want to know before we went to give this car away. And then the big question that we're kind of mulling over is how far do you go with the suspension and steering and brakes as far as upgrading this car? It's kind of been our go-to to throw the whole QA1 catalog at all these Chargers. Definitely something we could do with this one. But there's other stuff you can do to upgrade them too. You can upgrade like more high performance leaf springs. You can leave the torsion bars and do a couple tricks up front to get them to handle a little better. You can upgrade to a quick ratio steering box versus doing a whole rack and pinion. So some of those are questions we have. I want to get the 426 where it's a little more turnkey.
Can we start it?
Yeah, let's try. Let's try and start it. So we had it on a trickle charger. Let's just see what it does.
You guys want to hear what this 426 sounds like? It's alive! Dude, that fan is not playing around. All right, so it starts. By the way, that fan is super serious. Is that thing on the crank? Yeah.
I mean, it needs it.
Yeah. No, that thing is...
It's a big engine. So she's a little cold-blooded. So either the carbs need a little bit of tuning. It smells like it's running a little rich. But it starts, it runs. Once she's warmed up, she starts to settle into her idle. So, you know, I'd want to check the timing, the carb adjustment. It's just one of those things with an old school car when you get it here, what was acceptable for him and how infrequent he was driving it. He probably wasn't worried about sitting in it, warming it up for 5-10 minutes. Some of these old cars need that anyway. You know, it's a 426. They're not known for being like, especially this one's built. It has headers. You can tell it's a little rowdy. It probably has a small cam in it. So they're not known for being like sewing machine engines. But you can get this one to start a little bit better, but it does start. It's not a huge issue. It sounds good. It has good oil pressure, which is a huge plus. Doesn't make any weird noises under the hood. So, you know, maybe it needs some tuning, but all in all, it's a solid engine, which is important with a 426. It's not a cheap engine.
Yeah, obviously not a cheap engine, not a cheap car.
What do we?
90K in, 92K in.
Yeah.
What should we do with this car?
What do we do with it? That's the big question. And
we haven't committed to running it as a sweepstakes car.
Should we?
It's a Charger, so we just kind of bought. It's a Charger that looks good, which we kind of rarely pass on. So the question remains, what do we do with it? We could sell it. We could do some bolt-on stuff, like you said.
Yeah.
We could completely redo it. with like a modern Hemi or something like that, like the Blueprint 426, something like that. Do a lot of the same bracing underneath, all the suspension work you're talking about. That's basically probably some upgrades to the interior, and then I don't want to say paint and body. There's really only one rust spot that I saw that was
it's already snowballing.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
and it does. It snowballs that way. We just bought a 70 Charger. It wasn't as nice as this. This one's probably nicer than that car. But we decided to go full tilt, and it turned into a ground up.
See, that's
build.
almost an easier decision though, because when it's not as nice as this, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to paint it for sure. And then it's like, all right, well, if we're gonna paint it, then let's talk about the power plant. Then we're like, oh, cool, let's do a modern 426. And like, oh, well, if we're gonna have that power level, then we got to do A, B, C, and D. So
I like the drivetrain in this car. The 426 with the 4-speed is just an iconic.
It's a big block.
It's a Hemi. It's a Hemi
with a pistol grip, and it's got the 4-speed, right?
It's got a 4-speed, the A83. It's just got all the good, like any Mopar guy, like this is just the dream, right?
This is the classic Hemi Charger.
So like, how can you mess with? I don't want to say perfection, but how can you improve upon such a legend, right?
I think there's a lot of ways.
There's a lot of ways.
You can improve on such a legend. But let's hear from you guys. So, did we pay too much? What should we do with this? Do you want to win it? Let us know in the comments below. Joe's going to put all the math up here, let you guys know how much we're into this car, and then stay tuned to the channel. We'll figure out something to do with this thing.